Tell me, what do the British colonies, the Roman Empire, and the dynasties of ancient Egypt all have in common? Well, they fell. The same can be said of the Aztecs, the Ottomans, the Mongols, the Han and Tang dynasties, the Assyrians, and the Persians. You see, every civilization that has ever existed has eventually fallen. For a long time, we've been acting as if we are the exception to this rule. I think it's time we start rethinking our position. Despite what many believe, the world is a far better place than it used to be. We're safer, healthier, and more free. As far as living goes, there's no better time to be alive. There is a problem, however. You see, due to our relatively short lifespans, we have short perspectives, and because of this, many of us think the world as it is now is the way that it's always going to be. So much so that we refuse to accept even the possibility that things may go terribly wrong. In the face of current nuclear threats, rapidly advancing AI, and failing social discourse, the main responses I hear are ones of denial and somewhat forced optimism. Phrases like, "It'll be okay, we always manage to get through," or "Stop exaggerating, that'll never happen." It seems many people who say such things view life as just a constant wave of things getting better. A fear I have is that many of us, particularly younger folk in relatively wealthy countries, think that our way of life, that is a life of relative safety, food security, and luxury, is the baseline of human existence. It's not. Just because things have worked out till now does not mean that they're destined to forever, and I'll show you why. Tim Urban, in his book What's Our Problem, has an eye-opening image right at the start where he condenses all of human history into a 1,000-page book, with each page representing 250 years. From this, what we see is that in the grand scheme of things, human history isn't really that long at all. This particular moment we're living in, the world of widespread health, education, and freedom, is actually only the most recent page. And even then, it's only really the last 80 years of that 250-year page. Before this point, suffering in the form of poverty, discrimination, violence, sickness, and ignorance was the norm. What we're living in is not the default mode. It's a 30-day free trial, and we're getting close to the end of the month. Now, I'm not saying this to sound like an alarmist. The point that I'm trying to make here is that human flourishing is a recent phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon that is under no obligation to continue. For many of us, America has always been the global superpower. They make all the movies, they have the most money, they have the strongest military, and they have the most influence. But what's interesting is there was a time where the same could have been said for any influential global force. It seems that being a global superpower is only a temporary position. When we look at graphs that show a nation's rise to power and prosperity, it tends to look something like this. Essentially, they start poor, and as the years go on, their economy, tech, and influence all increase. And this rise generally leads to major societal changes. But then something interesting happens. Eventually, somehow, some way, they cease to exist, or at least cease to exist in the way they once did. Now, consider such a civilization. Let's say the ancient Egyptians. These dynasties lasted thousands of years. In their heyday, they were a powerhouse of military might, economics, and culture. It's almost impossible to imagine that their era came to an end. I'm sure at the height of the Roman and British empires, the same could have been said, let alone any other powerhouse civilization. If societies that had thrived for centuries and even millennia can have their way of life altered or even extinguished, what gives any of us so much confidence that our way of life is permanent? The lesson here is this: no matter how powerful a civilization is, it is always vulnerable to change. Wars, environmental disasters, diseases, shifting power dynamics, and economic or social failings are all possible at any stage of a civilization's life. Now, so far, we've only spoken about civilizations as societies or separate groups of people. Romans, Russians, Mayans, all different, but still all people. What if we zoom out and broaden our perspective? What if instead of talking about civilizations as separate cultures, we look at all civilizations together? A giant civilization made up of all civilizations. This one has a special name. It's called humanity. Humanity as a civilization is no different to any other society or empire that has ever existed. Unfortunately, it's just as vulnerable to failing as any of them. Generally speaking, in the past, if an army conquered another nation or a disease spread around a continent, it was almost always geographically contained. Sure, there are examples of armies and pathogens crossing seas, but this was an extremely difficult feat. Even so, it was highly unlikely that the negative impacts would erase or reverse progress for every group of humans on every single part of planet Earth. But things are kind of different now. There's almost no geographic containment. For the first time in history, humans themselves have the capacity to bring upon the demise of our very own species. Whether we like it or not, we live in a global community, and that means what happens in one part of the planet can affect everyone else. Our problems can now very easily cross seas, cover atmospheres, and travel through Wi-Fi connections. For example, the fallout of a nuclear war between only 2 countries can harm all life on Earth. A virus leaked from a lab in one city can spread across the globe and kill millions. Inability to adapt to new technologies can disrupt our way of life and perceptions of the world, leading to civil unrest and global destabilization. Now, it's one thing to lose a particular culture or group of people. It's something else entirely to lose all of humanity. For us to disappear is to lose the only light of consciousness that we know of in the universe. And if you think that that can't happen to us, I ask you to consider the previous rulers of planet Earth. 200 million years ago, the dinosaurs were the undisputed rulers of the planet. We all know what happened to them, and today the only evidence that we have of them existing at all are their bones, and they're not the only ones. Millions of species have gone extinct over the life of our planet. We are not guaranteed existence. Now, more so than ever, we need to view everyone as if we are on the same team. Not because it's fanciful fairy tale thinking, but because it's actually true. What we decide to do about AI, nuclear weapons, climate change, and social media will most certainly reverberate from Johannesburg to Moscow and everywhere in between. To fail at one is like pulling at a house of cards. One falls and everything comes crashing down. I want humanity to continue on this path of progress and prosperity, but to do so, we have to accept that in the grand workings of a universe that is billions of years old, the existence of humanity is a privilege, not a right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.